Zelensky Bad News. If Putin were to win in Ukraine, what would happen? Vladimir Putin has been widely misunderstood by Western leaders. George W. Bush, in 2001, said he looked the man in the eye and found him to be very straightforward and trustworthy. Actually, no. As President Obama put it in 2015, Vladimir Putin has no desire to get bogged down in an inconclusive and paralyzing civil conflict in Syria. Mr. Putin has supported his client, dictator Bashar Assad, after the murder of over 500,000 Arabs. In the hope that Mr. Putin's ambitions would be swept away by a tide of euros, Angela Merkel has made Germany dependent on Russian energy. The Chancellor was completely off base. After Mr. Putin dismembered Georgia in 2008 and annexed the Crimean Peninsula in 2014, while inserting irregular forces into eastern Ukraine to wage an endless insurgency, American and European leaders went out of their way to avoid provoking him. Whatever political party is in power in the United States at the time, reports that China has maintained at least one electronic espionage base in Cuba since 2019 should raise serious concerns about the country's foreign policy. China, with Russian intelligence as its junior partner, is determined to alter the international status quo by any means necessary. This includes not only challenging the United States' economic and military dominance, but also halting the spread of the democratic model to regions that are too close to China and Russia for comfort. Imagine Taiwan or Ukraine, or even Hong Kong in the past. The containment and dependence strategy has been unsuccessful. The United States defense strategy is in grave danger because China and Russia are now much more powerful than they were 20 years ago. This failed policy has increased hostility towards Taiwan and U.S. allies in Asia, and it has encouraged America's enemies to test the waters in other areas like Ukraine. Closer to home, China's growing influence in the region, including the establishment of bases perilously close to U.S. soil, has been encouraged by the lack of a clear policy toward Latin America. China and Russia are expanding their influence in Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Bolivia, and Honduras, while destabilizing Ecuador and Peru and even Colombia, our closest ally in the region, through Cuban proxies. Through its Global Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, China is also constructing infrastructure in these countries to foster economic dependence and expand military-capable infrastructure. China's expansion into American neighbors could spark a war if the United States does nothing to stop it. If the United States wants to avoid a war in the Western Hemisphere, it must stop giving ground to its adversaries and instead articulate and implement a policy in line with the Monroe and Reagan doctrines. There are 3 policy adjustments that will accomplish this. The United States must immediately and permanently end its engagement and coexistence policies with the Castro regime. U.S. security on its southern border cannot be guaranteed until the current regime is changed. A Marshall Plan to restore Cuba's economy after its democratic transition is possible thanks to Title II of the Helms-Burton Act. There is no other way to show the region that cooperating with the United States will be beneficial, while doing business with China and Russia will not be tolerated. Second, the United States should push for the return of American manufacturing to Latin America from China. Due to numerous trade policies enacted to aid China over the years, this will restore jobs that were lost to China in the region. Bringing these industries back into our sphere of influence will help reduce illegal immigration, strengthen regional governments, and improve regional alignment. The Western Hemisphere Nearshoring Act, co-sponsored by Democratic and Republican representatives from Tennessee and Florida, would help make this happen. Tariff increases on Chinese imports would be used to fund the relocation of U.S. firms from China to Central and South America. Third, the United States should restrict its economic aid to countries that uphold basic democratic norms and are in line with American interests. For example, President of Mexico Andrés Manuel López Obrador should not be able to make a deal with Vladimir Putin and then expect financial support from the United States. Also, Central American governments shouldn't assume we'll help them if they blatantly let caravans of illegal migrants pass through their territory and enter the United States. Whoever forgets the past is destined to live through it again. To prevent a nuclear war during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, the United States gave up key strategic advantages, such as the stealthy removal of its Jupiter missiles from Turkey. If the United States keeps giving up territory, especially in its own hemisphere, it could face dire consequences like losing Taiwan. The United States should finally abandon its failed containment policies and articulate a new vision, one that centers on the Americas.